of this. Hey everybody, it's Debbie Potts. I'm so excited to talk to Dr. Bubbs today to talk about sports nutrition, performance, recovery, repair, and of course we got to talk about the immune system. So
These days,
for
for
making
sure.
it on.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
Tell me, what's your why? You know, let's talk about who you are, what you do, because you do a lot. I must say, before we start, I heard you a couple of years ago at the Idea Fitness Convention.
Awesome.
And I reached out to you afterward, like one person out of everyone that speaks to the fitness industry that's talking sense, because I was, studying all this stuff at the time, but talk about what you do and your why.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of people, I mean, if it goes back for me, 20 plus years and playing sports in high school and struggling with some health issues, and I'm wondering, okay, well, going to the doctors and trying to figure out what's wrong, and somebody pointed me in the direction of a nutritionist, and all of a sudden, eat a little of this, less of that, and these kind of chronic, a lot of them are around things like immunity, getting sick frequently and things like that. And so when I did my undergrad, I was thinking, chiropractic, maybe medicine, but I really had this, the nutrition piece was such a big part of it. And so this is like the late 90s. And when I went around asking docs how much nutrition they would use, it was sort of like, well, we're interested, but no time for that. And even from a sports standpoint, I mean, sport dietitians didn't even really exist then either. It was mainly like the strength coaches and things like that. So, in Canada, there was a program, naturopathic medicine, where you could, do a medical degree, but have a focus on exercise. I was a personal trainer and strength coach and nutrition. And so after taking a few years off, that's what I did. And, to answer the why question, I mean, it just comes back to helping people. It's people are busy, people are struggling, if no matter what level we're talking about around, whether it's athletes and Olympics or the rest of us trying to feel better and perform better at work and at home. It's great to have connectivity like this, but we've never been busier than ever. And we're, it's unfortunately chronic conditions are on the rise. And I think, when we look at the research, what we eat and how we move and all these lifestyle factors. So it's great that those are more in the news now because people are starting to pay attention, but we have a ways to go with how we can actually help people implement those.
Yeah, so you are a licensed naturopathic doctor, performance nutrition lead for Canada's, their basketball team, performance consultant for many athletes, professional athletes, Olympic level athletes, speaker, and former strength coach. So you're doing a lot. Plus you have a bestseller book called Peak, The New Science of Athletic Performance that I know we've talked about with Ben Greenfield in our Keon program that I'm a part of. And
awesome.
You do a lot. So what drives you, that keeps you going and trying to spread this message about the importance of nutrition and health?
Yeah, I mean, it sort of comes back to that, a bit of a barbell approach, if you will, kind of on the one end, coming from a sporting background and being, quite competitive is trying to push that performance. We working for Canada basketball, so our men's Olympic program, so our Olympic team all the way down to our 13-year-olds. And, when I was interested in basketball, Canada didn't even have a team. I was a Detroit Pistons fan, and then the Raptors came, and Steve Nash, where, our Canadian won a couple MVPs, and, lo and behold, I'm working for Canada, and Steve Nash is the GM, and, a renowned high school player, Rowan Barrett, who played in the national team, is our president. So being able to contribute to that is pretty special. We have a phenomenal team, and now we're hoping to medal in the Olympics. So the 20 years, we were hoping this summer, but we'll have to wait.
Yeah.
So that's really, and whether it's other athletes or recreational athletes trying to achieve performance outcomes. And so, and I think that's where then, working with the general population, it's different if you're not really pushing performance and how things like nutrition or lifestyle might change. And it's just as difficult, it's just as grueling, like, people who are busy at work and busy at home and trying to maybe lose 10, 20, 30 pounds and lower their blood pressure and get their blood sugars under control. That's difficult too, and it's no less difficult than what the athletes are doing. I think sometimes people, think that, there's a value judgment around their inability to reverse these things. And then, because life is busy and work is busy and all these things, it's difficult. And I think the nice part is the solutions don't have to be, but so that's where I, working with both groups, there's commonalities between the two, but then there's obviously differences as well.
Yeah, I think, I've learned as an athlete myself and a trainer and a coach for many, many years now that I created the WHOLESTIC Method over the last 10 years. That's 8 elements to
Mm,
really be healthy. And it's, nutrition and exercise is just part of it. And there's so much
mm,
other stuff, the stress and the sleep and movement, mobility, and it's digestion and gut health. And I have
for sure.
hydration and happiness and, playing more and laughing and being
Yeah.
grateful. And I found that working with the clients as a personal trainer for 25 years, that's like, I can't help you by just training you your strength and conditioning workouts twice a week. And then just, the rest of the how many hours a week that they're on their own, they're not really doing anything to optimize their health. So you're doing that kind of with athletes, it sounds like, working on their nutrition, and you're doing their strength training conditioning program too, or is it just focused on nutrition?
So typically with the, elite and pro athletes, they'll have their own strength coach, and at Canada
Mm-hmm.
Basketball, we have our own physical development lead. But you're right. When I was personal training, there's such benefits to getting to know people at that level, right? So you see someone 2, 3, 4 times a week, all of a sudden you have rapport, you have relationship. And so if you are a trainer out there who's listening in, you're in the best scenario to be able to influence things like nutrition, because you can slowly drip feed changes in, one thing per week at a time, one goal at a time, slow and steady, and achieve an outcome. Whereas, in medicine or even in, dietetics, a lot of the practice is still, old school, really, right? Somebody comes in for a visit, and if you spend an hour and you give them the sheet, and they're meant to just go off and achieve it on their own. It's like taking a guitar lesson once and then trying to play,
Mm-hmm.
Stairway to Heaven or whatever you want to. It's like it's not a great method for teaching or developing habits. And so I think one of the best things, if you are, a coach or a trainer, we start to realize that that relationship you have is so important. If you build the rapport, then you've got the buy-in, and now you can slowly influence. And but back to your point, you know, even with that, it's hard to, people have all these other things going on in their lives. And so, maybe the reason why the person can't do the thing you want them to do has nothing to do with their comprehension of it. It's merely the fact that, they might be getting fired from their job, or they, you know, to have 3 kids at home, and don't, they
Mm-hmm.
can only sleep 6 hours because they literally have to get up, or they're waking through the night. So there's always that perspective. I think as coaches, over the years you start to appreciate. And I think even sometimes in medicine, there's just not enough time for even docs in like 15 minutes to go through all of these levels. It's sort of like, okay, you got a problem, let's give you this to try to fix it. When really, as you mentioned, it's kind of that iceberg effect, right? Underneath the water, there's a lot of stuff there that we need to unpack.
Yeah, we talk about that as an FDN practitioner. It's the iceberg is always in our slides of
Oh,
how
nice.
there's just so many things going on, and it's all connected. And one thing is off, they're all off. So I know a lot of people struggle. And just writing an article for my website this week on, you want your body back, and you're trying everything to lose weight, and your performance levels are going down, and I'm trying to watch what I eat, I'm trying to exercise more and train harder, but then you're still gaining weight, you're getting tired.
Mm.
And that's kind of what happened to me in 2013. But it's just how so many people can relate to that it's not just about being healthy, burning fat, improving your performance isn't just about training more and
Mm.
eating differently. And people get confused on what to eat, and there's carnivore, keto carnivore, paleo, and fasting,
So
and
this
it's
way,
just
that
like,
way, this way.
yeah. And N=1, I say all the time, we're all bio individuals. So what's your take on how to improve an athlete, say they're an endurance athlete? We're trying to optimize their health, and we want to improve performance. I hope everyone wants to improve longevity. And of course we want to burn fat. So what are some of your tips? You probably kind of go into your program, we'll talk about your new book and everything. So what's your kind of perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think nutrition's great because it just shows how human we all are, right? Like I have clients, one of them's a rocket scientist, another one's a surgeon, another gal's the head of a law firm. So there's these really rational, scientific, thinkers. And then when it comes to diet, it's like, all of a sudden we lose all rationality, and we want to win the lottery in 30 days, right? We want to, and so I think it's interesting when we have endurance athletes, because from a training standpoint, you give someone a plan, and they typically say, all right, I'm bought into the plan. I'm going to follow this for 12 or 16 weeks, and I'm just going to do the workouts the way it says. I'm going to report back. And it's like they've committed to this path. And as much as we want to do that with nutrition, those same individuals with nutrition will start to, veer off that path more and start asking questions and wondering. I don't mean asking questions in sort of a it's fine to ask questions, but in a way where they start to question the path, whereas they wouldn't do in their very same training program. So I think the most difficult thing with nutrition is that it does take time. And, the more, for example, your resting metabolic rate burns about 50% of all your calories. If you're overweight or obese, it can be up to 70%. And so if for months or years you've been restricting calories steeply or training intensely or not sleeping enough or stressed out, that resting metabolic rate is just going down and down and down. And so it's almost like you're chasing a circling drain. And this is where, how do we get it back up? Well, we need to sleep more. We need to eat more. And that's always the funniest thing for all. It's like, wait a minute, you want me to lose weight, but you're going to put more food. Yeah, we're going to put more food, oftentimes a lot more food. And, the plates, it's always interesting because the amount of food on the plate can be the same, but the amount of calories or carbohydrates and everything else can change just by changing it. Obviously, as you know, and a lot of your listeners, but you could have the same 1 cup of carbohydrates, but if you've got pasta or rice all the way down to sweet potato, all the way down to, let's say, broccoli, you're swinging from 60 to 10 grams of carbohydrates. And now if you go 2 or 3 cups, and so I think for people, number one is finding a plan or a path and understanding it, but then sort of committing to it and taking your time, right? I always tell clients, all right, you want to be fluent in French? Well, let me know how you do after 30 days, right? It's like, but when it's a language or it's a music, we just know, okay, that's going to take time. 6 months, a year, 2 years. But when it's nutrition, it's like we want, we see the abs on the Instagram and it's like, wait, I want those now, and people can get that, but it comes at a cost. And the cost is normally after the end of 12 months, they're not only back where they started, but oftentimes in a worse place, right? Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, it's because we're not, learning the habits and the things, ingraining the right habits. We're sort of just diving into an approach. So, and again, that doesn't matter if you're more elite or, in terms of exercise, or if you're someone just trying to lose some weight, the habits have got to be, instilled regardless.
I have like 50 thoughts in my head, but because I totally agree. And I just was writing about all this all week in this new little PDF for my website, that it's, healing and rebuilding if you have dysfunction in your body, imbalances that we all probably have at some point, some level, but it takes time. And I wrote my book, Life is Not a Race, 5 years ago. And I just was saying that, we're impatient. We just want, we're type A, triple A personalities. We want instant results. And when I had my breakdown and burnout on all my body systems, it led me down this path trying to get answers. And I wanted like someone to just give me that magic supplement that I can get back to racing next month. And
it's gotta be one, right? It's like, just tell me which one and I'll take it.
So I saw like 10 different people and I just blame them that no one's really helping me. No one understands me. And I realized as I was writing this week that I was expecting results in that 30 days. And now as an FDN practitioner, we start people, it's a 90-day protocol or longer. Like most people don't get all the results in 90 days because I always have to tell them, you probably worked up to this point the last 10 years. So it's going to take time to get yourself back to your optimal level. So
for sure.
Going back to your other question for you on nutrition, I know a lot of athletes, everyone, is into the biohacking world and performance gains and into fasting, intermittent fasting and keto, low carb and carnivore. And it's interesting figuring out, again, I always say N=1, but, people experimenting kind of, we need a template to start with and then tune, their macronutrients, figure out what is best for them. But as you said, some people just need to eat more. And I think that was a big thing. I was just doing fasting and being so low carb and doing, my fat bullet coffee and all that I was training 20 hours a week. But I think some people don't realize that you do need to eat a little more and have carbs, the good carbs like sweet potatoes, and they're not going to make you fat. You might actually get leaner. That it's confusing.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest confusing part is people ask questions wanting to kind of have the answer to a question.
Yes.
But the answer always changes because we have to ask what the context is, right? And there's a great story that Professor Andy Jones, who was involved in the Breaking 2 with Eliab Kipchoge, as they were getting that ready for Nike and trying to do this sub 2 hour marathon, he was testing all the elite athletes, but he had a few friends, recreational elite runners. These guys and gals were fast. I think one individual in particular came in and got tested before the pros, and he was going, on the treadmill and 12K, 13K, all the way up to 17 kilometers, and then, whew, exhausted, couldn't keep up. The pros come in and they start warming up at 15 or 16, and they go all the way up to 22, 23. So it's totally different. So even when if you're listening in and you hear recommendations for people who are more elite or professional, just disregard it. It does not apply, because if you put that same fuel into yourself and you're not running as fast, you get into what we call overfueling. And now we see a lot of studies done with continuous glucose monitors, and some done in what we call sub-elite, which are still very fit people. And, one was done in cyclists, of 10 cyclists, 7 days, and 4 out of 10 spent 70% of the week with their blood glucose levels in a pre-diabetic level. So there's just too much fuel going in. So I think the biggest thing is always, where are you at? What's the individual trying to accomplish? So if you're trying to lose, and generally, if you're trying to lose 20, 30, 40 pounds versus someone who's trying to lose 8 pounds, those are going to be different general approaches to start with. Just as you mentioned, the fitter we get, carbohydrates aren't inherently fattening, but for the general population, if you're trying to lose weight, you got 30 or 40 pounds, 5 out of 6, if you look at the top caloric foods that we eat, it's like grain-based desserts, breads, alcohol, pizza, soda pop, and I think there's fried chicken in there somewhere. So, if you go on a low carb diet, you basically wipe out all of the ultra processed food in your diet, and calories come tumbling down. So that's a great strategy for someone who's got a lot of weight to lose. Now, at some point, again, things are going to level off, and this is where, as you mentioned, whole food sources of carbohydrates are tremendous. And so the difficult part is always this idea of how come that person's consuming 80 grams of simple sugars an hour, and if I do 20, my blood sugars are going to be high. And this is where that individuality comes in, and it typically is around the fitness and glucose, how those two things marry up.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenges I speak about this a lot on the podcast, that we listen, read, watch social media, blogs, and other podcasts on low carb and keto and carnivore. And they might be bodybuilders, because I have a lot of carnivore friends that are doing, bodybuilders, but no one's looking at if you're an endurance athlete doing training for an Ironman or marathon. It's like, all right, you feel guilty at some point when you get so into this stuff that, like, oh, I'm having carbs. Is that going to kill me? We get so one end of the pendulum to the other that then you start to have some type of eating disorder, body image problems, because of this, dysmorphia we get from, okay, carbs are bad, but it's not all carbs. You need some good vegetables. And I just did a great hour podcast webinar with Karan from Microbiome Labs on my results on their new lab test called Biome FX. And I've been trying to do more protein, because that's what I hear about and that's what I'm told, and look at your blood type and your metabolic typing. But then I see my lab results. I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm eating too little vegetables. I need to up them all. So it's just, I think point is everyone's need to, experiment.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly fundamentals across, the board that are going to be similar to all of us, and then from there, it's just as you mentioned, we have these individual differences, because if you're starting from that fitness level and everything else, then there's going to be adjustments in terms of what you can take on board from an energy standpoint. And somebody else is going to be different, especially in terms of that idea of context. That's really interesting. Yeah.
But then, it's just most of the stuff out there isn't for endurance athletes, and you're working probably more higher. I mean, basketball is a little different than a marathoner, but, do you find it hard out there?
Well, it's an interesting question, because even in the research, they're trying to define, like, what is an athlete? Like, at what point do we define someone as an athlete? Because, I still consider myself an athlete. I haven't played anything for 20 years. So if I'm more of somebody who's working, I got 3 kids at home, when I read these articles or whatnot, we have to then be honest with ourselves and say, okay, where am I on this pendulum? Because if someone's playing in the NBA, they might need 45 calories per kilogram body weight. But, somebody who's working all day might only need 30 calories per kilogram per day. So yeah, there's a big swing there. And I think this is where, the conversation even around, especially today, around plant versus animal, still kind of misses the boat. I think the better conversation is, minimally processed versus ultra processed. You know, we don't, regardless if it's animal or vegetable, if you can get to more things that are minimally processed, you know, and in the book I talk about the NOVA classification system, this new system, University of from Brazil, Carlos Montero's work, and how, you know, that keeps us honest a little bit. It tends to dovetail a little bit with more ancestral approaches, but there's a lot of plant-based foods in there as well. And then we work our way up to this fourth category, which is ultra processed food, which is the foods that we should avoid most, really, or limit. And when you look at the US, Canada, the UK, 50% of everything we spend on groceries is on ultra processed food. And so currently I'm over here in London, and I find it fascinating because if I get on a train in London and go down to Paris, so 2 hours train ride,
Yeah.
you get off the train, now all of a sudden it's 14% of household spending is on ultra processed food. You go to Spain, 20%, Italy, 13%. So even when we talk about the Mediterranean diet, if you go around the Mediterranean, the real big common theme is they're not eating processed food. They're eating real food. And that's a great place for a lot of us to start, because inherently it brings down the caloric density and it increases the nutrient density. We tend to get the protein along with that and fiber and everything else. So that's a good place to start from, because I think that's one of the secrets of the quote unquote Mediterranean type dietary pattern.
It's real food.
Yeah.
Eating real food.
Yeah, exactly. Like 100 years ago would be just like, yeah, normal everyday food.
Well, that's like, I, you know, was telling you before we started that we thought it'd be fun to live in London because you can just go to Paris in 2 hours, or you can go to Mallorca, or for the weekend cycling. I mean, you can just go anywhere. So it is so nice when you're in Europe, because there's not fast food restaurants on every corner, and, you know, people go to the markets and get the farmers market. The grocery stores are just so different than in the North America side of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit easier, and you tend to just see more walking around. Like the cities, because they're old cities in Europe, they're built for people to walk around in. And so when you look at things, we talk about weight loss. I mean, you know, that fancy term, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, that term for just all the walking around and moving you do in a day, that's one of the best predictors of maintaining a healthy weight. And when you look at sort of a European style living versus our North American, you know, we spend most of the time sitting in a car, whereas those folks are walking around, taking transit, et cetera, et cetera. So it's amazing how that can be a real big shifter for people. I mean, we can just figure out a way to get more movement. Now, I know people are going to have to drive when you're in North America to certain places, but trying to figure out in your day, hey, wait a minute, where can I fit in, you know, more movement, parking further away, taking walking meetings, going for a walk after dinner, you know, with family or friends or whomever. Those are the kind of things that if they become habits, and all of a sudden you connect them with a bit of community and a bit of talking and laughing, you know, then we get this trickle down effect that benefits all the other things we're trying to shift in one's life.
That's funny. I was thinking, I heard on the news today that because of the coronavirus, when we're recording this, we're kind of winding down winding up to phase 2 in our Seattle, Washington state. And it's funny, they're reporting how many people are drinking too much and having alcoholic issues. And I wanted to post on my Facebook today. It's like, you know, there's a great idea to exercise at night instead of sitting and drinking alcohol every night and watching too much Netflix or whatever people are doing. Because we went for a bike ride last night, got home at 7 o'clock. You know, it's just, why do people, they have a choice, is what I keep saying. Health is a choice, and you get to decide what you're going to do. So
for sure. And it's amazing how people don't make those connections, right? If I had $1 for every time I asked a client how stressed they were, and they tell me, oh, I'm not stressed at all. And then we ask around, you know, how busy they are. And of course they're very busy, which tells us a bit about stress. But, you know, back to your question around alcohol, you know, they're not stressed, but their alcohol consumption is, you know, there's 2-3 glasses every single night, or their sugar consumption. And so making that connection of, wait a minute, maybe my alcohol consumption is a proxy for my stress, right? Because as you mentioned, or sugar consumption or whatever it might be for that individual, because as type A's, we want to always believe that we're on the right side of things. Like, we're not stressed, we're not this, we're not that. So you have to find these other little markers. And I think as coaches, this is one of the things that, you know, good coaches do, is they kind of just show people, you know, hey, this is happening. And then the person all of a sudden goes, you know, they make the connection for themselves. Go, oh, geez, yeah, actually, you're right. All of a sudden I am drinking, you know, half a bottle of wine every single night instead of 3 nights a week or 2 nights, or whatever
bottle,
it is, right?
Full bottle.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. You know, and everyone's got a different, I had a client say they were quite moderate drinker and they have a bottle of wine every night. So people have different standards, you know?
So going back to athletes, I know a lot of people are always confused, as we said, what to eat, but how do you know if, working with athletes, how to fine tune their nutrition plan for performance? You're talking about, training, race
Hmm.
day, whenever we have races again, that I think it gets confusing for people. How do you know if they're doing it right? Is there some tests? Do you measure their glucose? How do you know what is good for an individual?
Well, endurance sport's great because it's, things getting tested in terms of things like VO2 max or lactate threshold. You can do some real concrete tests to let you know,
Mm-hmm.
here's my fitness then, here's my fitness now. From a body composition standpoint, there's also important changes because if you're going to be cycling up hills, it's not easy if you got an extra 10, 15, 20 pounds to have to cycle up that hill, and you're going to be in a
Yeah.
competition. So this is where body composition becomes important, and we can then use that as a metric going forward and see how we're and so that idea of training nutrition versus race day, on race day we know we need to have enough carbohydrate available for the person to push hard, because as your exercise intensity increases, so does your reliance on carbohydrate. Now when you're training and maybe you do need to lose, that individual needs to lose some weight, there's going to be some sessions where we purposefully reduce and restrict that. And the hard part is, hey man, that doesn't feel so good. Some people say that was a tough session, I was really struggling out there. Well, that's part of the adaptation process. We're strategically and purposefully reducing amounts in certain areas, right? Oftentimes for more aerobic rides, but sometimes for more glycolytic, interval-based rides as well. And that's where you can then start to make some progress. And I think this is where, the general public would struggle a little bit, because we tend to follow a black or white approach, as you mentioned before. So like, I'm going to go low carb or I'm not low carb. Whereas when you look at the pros, if we learn a lesson from the pros, and this was a big impetus for my book, was to try to translate what people are doing in the elite levels down, for the rest of us to benefit, is that, they're mixing and matching depending on the day, depending on what they're doing. And the acronym that's often used is, or the saying is, fuel for the work required, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you're going to sit at your desk all day, we think of carbohydrate as a fuel. We probably don't need nearly as much carbohydrate as the day you go out on a Sunday and do 4 or 5 hours on the bike or whatever it might be, or even if you're training for an Ironman. I mean, the amount of miles that we're taking on board. And so, the nice with those fitness metrics, with the body composition metrics, and if you take in lab tests at the outset, and then somebody's subjective well-being, right? Fatigue, muscle soreness, sleep. A typical daily wellness questionnaire tells you a lot about someone's current level of recovery and overall health. So those are some great ones to just start to paint a picture of your athlete in front of you, so that you can know, just like with training, are we pushing too hard from a nutrition standpoint and trimming too much, or maybe we're over fueling still. That client who's trying to lose weight, and your weekly averages, you say, wait a minute, we haven't lost anything for 2 or 3 weeks now. Let's go back and figure out. And I think the biggest thing is for the athletes, especially recreational, is it's not a question of right versus wrong, especially for a lot of people who already eat well. It's just a question of which tool do we want to use, because all the diets are just different tools anyway, right? They're all
Mm-hmm.
operating by the same principles. So you can choose vegan, paleo, whatever you want, but we want to just find the right tool for the right training that you're doing, and be able to create that fitness.
So a lot of people, as endurance athletes, we should be burning fat as their main fuel source. So are you, having people, would you think, for endurance sports to fast beforehand? And, the whole carb timing thing, I think it gets confusing. Again, it's per individual, but, sometimes we think, oh, I can go fasted. And I hear people, almost celebrating and bragging slightly that I could, do a marathon and I had nothing but water. And sometimes I'm starting to think now, well, could you even go faster and your performance is even better in recovery if you just had a little something that, that was that extreme because of us all
Yeah.
type A athletes that I think, we take something almost to get obsessed with it and take it too seriously, that we don't like, oh, I could have done a little bit better or gone a little faster, felt a little stronger.
Oh, for sure. And it's definitely that question again of like where somebody sits on that spectrum of more performance driven and your body composition and health is in good form, or somebody who's trying to lose weight and improve their health, right? So you get a lot of people who decide to run a marathon because they want to lose weight and get fitter, and they train for 4 months and they barely lose any weight. And so if that is you know, if anybody listening in sounds like a similar scenario,
Hmm.
then you've definitely got the wrong fueling pattern, because you're over fueling there. We want to be able to have that person lose a lot more weight along that training strategy. Now, as you mentioned, if people get, you know, maybe somebody did lose 20, 30, 40 pounds of the low carb diet, and now they're at a weight they like and they want to train up for something, and now they're stuck with that same approach for their training, because, you know, in their mind they're a little bit scared because, hey, wait a minute, I cut all those carbs and I lost all this weight. Now I'm going to be training hard. Surely if I put carbs in, I'll get, you know, I'll add more. And so this is where, again, because the context has changed, then it's okay for the strategy to change. And so for sure, as those bouts of exercise get more and more intense, we're definitely oxidizing carbohydrates. We're burning carbs in those intense sessions. And as you mentioned, yeah, for those aerobic sessions, which typically are going to make up 70, 80% of your sessions, you know, we do want, you know, individuals burning body fat if we can. And so that's where, if you, depending on the breakfast that you might choose, and I'm okay with a lot of recreational clients, you know, training fasted if it makes things kind of easier for them. Again, maybe the more competitive somebody gets, then there's going to be maybe a bit more give and take there. But and we see even in the research with taking protein on board, you know, a protein shake and then doing that morning exercise, you get all the benefits effectively as if you were fasted. So for those people who want to kind of hedge their bets and protect some muscle mass because they're getting fitter, you know, a quick 30-gram protein shake, or 20 grams if you're a female. It's a nice way to do it. It's kind of easy to do as you're heading out the door. I know early morning sessions, it's kind of tough to be taking in, you know, a big old breakfast before if you're running or something. But yeah, it's really context driven, and you know, where is that person, what they're trying to achieve. And definitely as you get fitter, you know, carbohydrates aren't inherently, you know, causing weight gain.
Well, I think we feel like you're not going to continue burning fat, that if you had some carbs, it's going to break your fat burning. And as we get more metabolically efficient, we're more metabolically flexible. So it's just, you know, if you're burning fat, you're training in those fat burning ranges. So you're, you know, maximum aerobic function heart rate if you're doing your training there, versus if you're doing higher intensity interval training, it's going to, you know, it's okay to have a little something. It won't shift you out of fat burning, because we're probably using some carbohydrates in that longer distance.
Not only is it not just okay, it's required. Like if you start teetering more towards just the fat, you actually start to lose the ability to get into that fifth gear, right? So that PDH enzyme is not going to work as well, and so now we're gonna struggle to actually push the gas pedal down. So yeah, it's great to be able to have that. Hey, we're going to do this for most of the time, but you don't need to feel guilty about that day that you're going to have more carbohydrate. Like we need it. We gotta, you know, and as you mentioned, you know, pick the right ones, pick whole food sources. But and again, that variance just depends on, you know, fit, lean athlete really trying to push hard, or somebody who's, again, trying to lose 30 pounds and wants to get into it for the, you know, for the health benefits.
So a lot of my friends that are big carnivore, and they're out there saying your carbs are not needed. You don't need carbohydrates because your body can make them from gluconeogenesis from eating protein. But to me, that means like I'm breaking down my muscle. So for athletes, do you find that different, that we do need carbohydrates, that we can't just survive on strict protein and fat diet and have really no to little carbs? They're not necessary, they say.
Again, it comes with a confusion of like, we all like to call ourselves athletes, but, you know, I'm not playing in the NBA. So when we get into these are very different comparisons. And so for sure, when we look at the research, you know, the more, you know, there's 1,000 changes of direction in an NBA basketball game. I mean, there's heavy accelerations and decelerations, jumps, sprints. I mean, the demands are massive. And so you wouldn't be able to get all of that energy in from just a fat diet. And you need carbohydrate to get that fifth gear, to replenish, you know, those type 2 fibers that are going to be most powerful. So, you know, if somebody, you know, if you follow a keto, like a carnivore or keto diet, and you find success, like that's fantastic. Like, I don't care what strategy my clients pick, you know, go for it, whatever you want. But let's not forget the outcome. Sometimes we get so married to the approach. It's like, wait a minute, well, what are we trying to achieve? Oh, we're trying to achieve weight loss. Are you at the weight you want? If the answer is no, then you have to be open to nuances, right? And then the final thing is understanding the principles, right? Because if we think of a carnivore diet, well, that's a very high protein diet that's very calorically restricted. That's actually not a bad approach for a lot of people who are very overweight for the short term. Now you don't have to have red meat. You could change that to whatever, you could make it lentils, or you could make it, or, tofu if you wanted, or whatever, anything in between. But the principle is very high protein and reducing calories dramatically. Now, if you're very overweight, that'll help for a small period. But as we mentioned before, we have to understand that steep caloric drops mean that we're more likely to lose muscle, and that we're more likely to start to slow metabolism. So there's going to be a give and take point. And so I think if people can appreciate the mechanism a little bit of how these things are working, and I know people are busy and it's hard to understand how everything's working, but just to know all of these diets, they all operate by the same rules.
Mhm.
And so it's great if people find one that they like, and I don't mind, people, hey, you got friends who are doing it and people on the internet. I mean, hey, that's awesome. But always come back to like, hey, wait a minute, did I actually achieve the thing I'm trying to achieve? Like, am I as lean as I want, or did I race as fast as I could? Because if you didn't do those things, then you got to go back to the drawing board and ask your coach and figure out, okay, maybe I need this approach, whatever, keto with more carbs on these days, or whatever it might be.
Yeah, I think it's a challenge out there because you get people arguing, I know, in my world that, this carbohydrates are not essential. There's essential fatty acids, essential amino acids, but not any essential carbohydrates. But I think it's for athletes, because I, was talking to Dr. Leon, Gabrielle Leon does, high protein, and she thinks you should have whatever goal weight has that many grams of carbohydrate or protein, and have that. And it's interesting. Then some other people say, you have to have more greens and blah, blah, blah. But anyways, I think it's for just athletes, when you're training, you just have to, like we said in the beginning, fine tune for yourself. But understanding, is it working for you? Like, I wasn't losing weight doing this intermittent fasting every day and being so strict on when I could eat and break my fast, and not just eating more one meal a day. And then I realized, maybe it's not working for me. Maybe I should eat something like around 11 a.m. and not just try to not eat until 1 o'clock and then experiment with that. So I think you just have to go, like you just said, is my body where I want it to be? Is my performance where I want it to be? What tweaks do I need to make? And maybe if what I'm doing, I'm so like married to it, that maybe I should mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, because I mean, ultimately, what's in the research, and oftentimes it's actually quite clear in the research, and what we hear about online are very different things. And so we're trying to just pull a little bit more of the evidence to people, because they tend to get a certain message, and it's almost like, being in a dark room looking for something with a flashlight, and you're in the corner and you think, geez, I can see everything. And then someone turns the lights on, and all of a sudden you realize you're in a giant room, and there's a lot more information out there. So I think this is where, get back to your question, like, what are you trying to achieve? If you're trying to run as fast as you can, then we have to look at, hey, what energy systems do we need? If you're trying to, if you're a race walker, I mean, that should be the best diet for a keto diet. But at this point, they don't even win yet. So it's like, wait a minute. Now, that doesn't mean you can't follow a keto diet, and doesn't mean you can't do well on a keto diet. But, it always depends. Like, does your salary depend on you winning the race? And that's what I define as a professional athlete. Like, if you lose, can you not pay your rent? Because then you're going to want to follow the approach that we know wins. If we're doing this for fun and we want to improve our health, then it's okay to have some room for error and to self-experiment more, right?
So let's move to, I want to talk about your book. Now,
sure.
I know it's a big, lots of topics in it. So your focus on it is more kind of driven to the athlete improving performance is your kind of audience, or what's your goal with the book?
I mean, it's meant for the ultimate goal in the book is sort of what we just talked about, is to say, what are people who are actually working in high performance? Because we often don't hear about them. The people who are working in the NBA, the NFL, or for Tour de France, they don't have 100,000 followers on Facebook or Instagram, right? And so we get a lot of mixed messages. So let's bring some of their information out and distill it down. And so we talk about athlete health. We talk about fueling, whether you're trying to improve your physique, endurance, or team sport. We talk recovery, and then we talk mindset, how important that is. And so, just bringing out the fundamentals, right? What do we need to, because I'm sure you see all the time, where people are trying to achieve something and working hard, and we go back at just the big rocks, right? The fundamentals. We say, you know what, we're missing a few things in there. And sometimes they'll refer to them as, as buckets, because like even if you fill a big bucket half full. If you're aiming for that little bucket, that supplement that's going to help you, well, even if you fill that one all the way up, you don't get a lot of, you get the 5%. But if you fill the big buckets up 50%, you're going to make some big strides. So the fundamentals are such a huge, part of the game, and being an expert in the fundamentals is really what makes people excel in sport, whether you're playing basketball or endurance athlete or overall health.
Well, it's funny. A friend of mine asked me yesterday actually to come help her teenage kids. Her son and daughter are both highly competitive basketball players, and
Okay.
they need help with nutrition because they don't listen to mom, and so they want to come
Yeah,
help.
it's always
And my husband said a good tip: if you want to be, what level athlete do you want to be? Do you want to be a top performing athlete, or just want to be? I don't know what he said. It was a good example. I was like, how to write that down. Like, do you want to be this level of athlete, or do you want to be up here?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where nutrition comes in. I would think, you can't eat crap and eat at McDonald's every day and expect to be a high performing athlete. You need to work on nutrition to improve your performance and your recovery and repair, and all that. It's a part of that process.
Absolutely. And that's where we, again, we would look at the research and say, okay, basketball players, professional basketball players, when we look at all the research, like how many grams per kilogram of carbs would they typically have? And you're looking at, 4.5, 5.5, 6 grams per kilogram. So if a guy weighs 100 kilograms, that's 500 grams of carbohydrates.
Wow.
How many calories are they burning? 4,500. I mean, these are some big numbers. And this is where, it's so different from the everyday life that it can be tricky. But again, for every sport, we want to kind of figure that out, whether you're a gymnast or a boxer or an endurance athlete. What are these ranges that we want to shoot for, and then start from there, and then start to personalize off that.
Good. And so the book is been out, and what do you feel like, your goal is to help people get more information, and how do they learn more? They read it, they're like, I need some help. What's the next step?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a really fun book to be able to kind of interview a lot of people who are working in high performance and be able to break it down into these different chunks of athlete health and fueling and recovery and mindset. And thankfully it's been pretty well received around people in performance and people in general public. We've been 12 months in a row on the Audible #1 bestseller, so people want to dive into that, then it's a good starting point. And the nice part is we've got over 500 references in there, so you don't have to go start to finish. You can just pick whichever chapter you like and dive into that. But it's a good place to start for people. And I think anyone who's trying to improve our performance in life too, right? I mean, if you're busy, I've got 3 kids under 6, you work long days, you don't get to sleep enough, and it's like, okay, well, geez, how do we do this? And of course, when I'm over 40 now, and all of a sudden all those years of playing basketball, you think, okay, my knees now, if I do this or that, they don't feel as good as they used to. So things, as we get older and we talk longevity, this is where different things become important. We talked blood sugars before. Glucose control is a huge predictor of cardiovascular deaths and increased incidences of cognitive decline and things like that. And so, back to your comment around testing, where do people sit? Because even in the normal range, if you're in that upper quarter, then you are at increased risk. That does let us know that from a nutrition standpoint or a movement standpoint, hey, what do we need to do differently? And I think, like everyone, we want to just, athletes are the same. Even if I've got athletes getting ready for the Olympics or professional athletes, we want to give them one thing at a time most of the time, or a very, because people are busy, they got a lot of things. So how can we help people do the least amount and get the most benefit? Where I think people are used to doing 10 or 12 things and getting very little dividend from that, very little payout. So we want to try to flip that on its head so that, you can make some progress. And then, people always talk about building habits, and hey, habits are tremendous, but ultimately what we want to build is automaticity, right? It's automatic. You sit in your car, it's not because you're inspired, it's not because you're motivated, it's not because you're even disciplined that you put the seatbelt on. It's because you've done it so many darn times that your brain literally just does it for you. And so if we can get to that point with some nutrition around, hey, what we choose for breakfast, or the late night snacks that tend to come in too often, if we can start to do that, then all of a sudden, hey, this nutrition stuff actually is a lot easier than, it doesn't need to be so confusing or so stressful.
Yeah, there's That's always a a goal when I'm working with clients, is make it sustainable. This is not a diet.
Yeah.
This is not something you're going to stop. And if I'm just coaching them 30 days, ideally I like working 90 days or longer with people, because I think
Hmm.
30 days people think, oh, okay, I'm done. I go back to my routine. And then the 90 days, I have a client I've been working with since January, and she's just realized she had Mother's Day dinner made for her family, and she started to make stuff. She didn't realize she was making it healthy, real food, no crap in it. And she's like, it was
Hmm.
automatic. I didn't even think twice. And then she realized the next day that, like, yay, a win. You know, that's a huge
Yeah.
success when it's not even, it's just a normal thought process to make real food, and how you can make appetizers in a dinner that's not made with
Oh yeah.
processed oils.
And to that point, I mean, I think it's, people like to work one-to-one when they're having success. And then when they have a challenge, that's actually the time where they're going to learn something the most, right? This is actually the moment. But unless you have at least 3 months with somebody, when somebody does hit a real tough challenge, oftentimes, they won't come back for a visit, or all of a sudden they fall off. But those are the moments. It's like, well, no, don't stop now. This hard thing that you're dealing with, this is where we're going to actually solve something that in the months down the road, now you're going to have the skills, the tools, the habits to be able to deal with it. And I think that's where, when we look at nutrition coaching over longer periods, it's much better that way, because people are then, for lack of a better term, stuck in to embrace it. Versus, if you're only on a 2-week plan or a 30-day plan, people go, oh, well, I did well for 3 weeks, I guess it's not working. And then, maybe stop. And that's where, no, it's not that it's not working. It's just everyone, no matter what level you are going to face challenges. And so this is where we've got to put our heads together and get our hands dirty and figure this out, and it takes work for anybody.
Do you meet with clients weekly or every couple weeks online that you
So I
help?
work with programs. I have 12 weeks, 6 months, and a year, and the same thing with athletes. So if people come on board, I still do the odd one-to-ones, but it's more just around commitment, around that whole approach of like, hey, if we're going to do this, let's both commit to a certain amount of time, and that way we can get people the best outcomes.
Yeah.
um, for sure.
So talk about that program. You have a 12-week nutrition coaching program that people can get a 20% off with the code Low Carb Athlete. So talk about what that program is about.
Yeah, so it's a lot about what we touched on here. It's just a way for us to be able to, we connect for visits, so visit, and every month we touch base with clients, and then from there, week to week, there's instructions around that, the goal for that week, and ultimately trying to do a few things. One of them is just to lay down the fundamentals. Like, these are the big rocks that we need to achieve, and oftentimes, no matter what level people are at, we all still need to go back to the fundamentals and be able to instill those things. And then the feedback week to week just helps people, because again, we troubleshoot, we problem solve, and we have enough time. It's almost like nowadays Netflix is popular. People like these long story arcs, right? We need to do that with nutrition, right? We can't have just a small one visit. We need to be able to have the time to be able to tell the whole story, and for people to experience that. And just like a good series, there's that middle part where there's a conflict, there's a struggle, there's something the person has to get through. And that's where coaching is great, because this is where people then need to learn and come out the other side with the tools and the habits they need to succeed.
Perfect. Well, I know we're running out of time, and you've got kids going to pop
We've
up
done
through the
well. There's
back
been
window.
no screaming so far. I think we're really it's good.
So I'm excited to dive into your book. I was waiting to buy, I just was telling you, I haven't announced to everyone that we are moving to Escondido, San Diego, and we
Amazing.
decided it was time to sell. A realtor said, and a week later, our house sold, and so it's like 2 weeks of
Wow.
craziness. So we move in the next month. So this is good timing, so I can, work on catching up on books when I get down there. But I
Awesome.
think, your book we can find on Amazon, or where else should people go to find the book? We got drbubbs.com, and there's athleteevolution.org. Is that the programs on there?
So Athlete Evolution, if people are more interested in sort of the high performance nutrition for
Okay.
elite sport, pro sport, that type of thing, they can go there. drbubbs.com is my website. I've got a funny last name, so on social media at Dr. Bubbs, Instagram, Twitter, all that stuff, you'll find me. And yeah, the book, wherever books are sold, Amazon's typically, Audible if you want to listen to books too. It's actually me narrating, so that was a good 25 hours of recording. Hopefully it's passable for everyone.
Perfect. See, I can understand your language because I'm, as I said, originally from Canada, but it's just always nice to have
Yeah,
Canadian
there you go, right?
people on the show. I'm like, oh, I know what you're saying. That's how I used to always say the word, and people made fun of me. But
Yeah.
now that's the
Yeah,
old
it's funny.
normal
I've
for
got
me.
a French Canadian mom and a British wife, so my accent, depending on who I'm talking to, it changes.
That's great. That's kind of more fun having a little accent. So, all right. And much longer are you living in London for? Are you guys staying there for long term?
We'll see. We'll see. Yeah, we're not too sure, but yeah, it's been a good base to be able to work with clients and athletes. So we'll see what the future holds.
Yeah, you're kind of in between both countries,
Yeah,
pond,
exactly. Yeah,
across the pond.
yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for your time today. And we
All
look
right.
forward to reading the book and learning more about the program.
Cheers. Thanks so much.